All right. Then when Jane is finished, I'll come back up and I'll introduce Kirk and Philip, and then they'll get to put the panels together.
Great. Thank you, Todd. Good morning. I just wanted to say a few statements about the EBD to kind of familiarize you with the objectives and the process with which it was written. So the Pebble Project Environmental Baseline Data, the EBD as we call it, is an extensive scientific document that represents the first 5 years of the Pebble environmental studies. These early studies will inform the affected environment section for the NEPA process for the EIS. The studies also guide the preliminary project decisions. For example, sensitive areas are identified so we can consider them when we're deciding where to site facilities, and they're factored into other models. Streamflow data is factored into water balance models, for example, to inform water management decisions. These early studies also help inform the design of additional studies to support baseline monitoring and final engineering once a project design has been determined. However, it's important to remember the EBD's purpose and objectives as well as its context in relation to a full set of data that will be collected. The objective of the EBD is to characterize the existing regional environment prior to any disturbance from construction or operation of a mine facility. The EBD data set was studies that were conducted from 2004 through 2008, with a few updates in a few sections for 2010. The Pebble Environmental Study Program continues to evolve, and we look forward to your recommendations and suggestions for our consideration in the future study development. These aren't studies that we stopped and published. We were ongoing with these studies, and we just published the data that we had for 5 years. As you review and discuss these data, we request that you keep the following points in mind. A variety of methods and studies have been included, each with their own strengths and limitations, to provide a wide spectrum of knowledge and perspective. The Environmental Study Program is not a static program. A number of the studies in the EBD continue beyond the 5 years of data covered in the EBD, and some new studies have also been initiated since 2008. The environmental program will continue to evolve with new and modified studies over time. The studies are set up to provide data representative of typical environments in the study area. The sampling sites do not represent the location of any facilities or proximity to any facilities other than the Pebble deposit itself. The sampling stations and methods within these EBD studies are not set up to establish reference sites for future monitoring. Until PLP has settled on a project design, it's not meaningful for us to set up monitoring sites or reference sites. That's something we will do once we have a design in place. Once a project has been determined, the studies will be designated to provide data for comparative analyses that will demonstrate temporal and spatial changes. These studies will be based on indicator species and parameters that are best suited for determining local cause and effect studies. Future comparative studies will use a defined set of methodologies particularly suited to that express purpose, and as appropriate will incorporate statistical power analyses to evaluate adequate sample size. We do expect that much of the data collected in this first 5 years that's presented here in the EBD will be used as part of the permitting process and the monitoring program later on. However, which data collected where, over what period of time, using what methods has yet to be determined. We will also be adding new studies so that we make sure we have the stations in the correct places and for an adequate sample size. And something else I want to just add to this also is we don't have a mine design at this point in time. It's not that we're not sharing it. We don't have one yet. We don't have a small static set of alternatives that we're not sharing yet either. We're still evolving mine concepts. We're still considering a wide range of options. And until we settle down with that, it's very hard to determine where exactly you would do monitoring to detect impacts. We do, however, have a lot of good data over a wide range of area. Much of it will be useful. Much of it gives us just a good idea of the region itself so that you can analyze the alternatives once we have them. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Jane Whitsitt, who can further describe the EBD structure and content. Unless there's questions.
We'll take those. those later. Come on up.
Good morning. I'm going to take a few minutes here to get my presentation up. So what I'm going to do is and many of you have seen this information already, as I have presented it in the past, but because we have a much, much broader audience today, we do want to take a few minutes and give people a big, big overview of what the environmental baseline studies are and the document itself to get you oriented to that. And because of what you'll be doing today and through these sessions, you'll be getting into more details. So it's kind of a way to get the whole picture of what the studies are and the document itself. Looks like we have it almost. Okay, great.
You can advance.
Thank you. Well, my name is Jane Whitsett, and I've been on the project since 2004 and have managed the baseline studies since 2008 through this summer. My status has changed, but that's it's very relevant to the information that you'll be talking about over the next few days. I want to orient everyone to where the project is. So this is a map here that we use to indicate the project location. And if you look at Lake Iliamna there, kind of in the middle of the lake, and you go straight north, you'll see the word pebble on a small yellow dot, and that indicates the deposit. So you can see there that it's about 30 miles north of Lake Iliamna is where that's located. And there's a couple things I want to point out here. You can see some streams there that are there near the deposit, and then they flow to the west. And this is part of our study area, and to get people oriented to the waterways there, the two streams that you see going to the west, the one to the upper there that kind of comes out of the P itself, that's the North Fork Koktuli River. And then the one that comes out through the south and goes straight west, that's the South Fork Koktuli River. And that joins up with the Koktuli River there and continues on to the Mulchatna River and the Nushagak River onto Bristol Bay. So that's the connection, one of the connections to the Bristol Bay area there from the project. Another one that's not really shown on the map, this map didn't quite capture that, but there is another stream called the Upper Tulare, and that one comes out of the eastern side of the deposit, the headwaters of it, and then it flows straight south into Lake Iliamna. And then Lake Iliamna there you can see is drained by the Kwijak River into Bristol Bay. That's another connection to the Bristol Bay watershed. So that gives context to the streams, and these are very much a part of the information that's in our studies and gets you oriented to the waterways there. The other information that's on this slide here is just an overview of land status. You can see there the blue color, that's state lands. There's a lot of state lands, and the project itself is on state lands. There's also a lot of national parks and preserves in the surrounding areas. Actually, I think most of the area is national park and preserve. The area where the Pebble project is in a mining district. So a little context there about where we are. Here, this is more, we've zoomed in now, and you can see Lake Iliamna there. And the deposit now it's that pink dot to the north of Lake Iliamna. And you see different colored polygons there, and those are depicting different study areas for the project that are named in the EBD that we use to orient the studies and to define different areas. So the darker tan one there that covers the deposit there that's just north of Lake Iliamna, that's what we call the mine study area. And so in the EBD, that term is used frequently, and that's what we mean when we say the mine study area is that particular polygon. And it's about 250,000 acres. And it really represents, that area represents mostly our wetlands and vegetation and all of our hydrology and water quality studies. Things like wildlife and subsistence and cultural resources, they go well beyond that. Obviously, for wildlife, the range is much, much larger, so the geographic area is actually larger for some of our studies than what you see here. The other area that you see there that's in the pale yellow, that's part of our transportation corridor. And so that's depicting that study area. And then the pink is what we call the marine studies. And the marine studies are there because this gives us a connection through our transportation corridor to Cook Inlet for transportation purposes. And so we have a series of studies where we've studied the marine environment as well. And so when you put all this together and you look at the size there, from the deposit there all the way out to Cook Inlet, it's 80 or 90 miles depending on which route you take. And so it's quite a distance and it's quite a size. And it's part of the reason why these studies have taken the time and effort that it's taken to accomplish them, and also to get the data in a form that we can evaluate and report the data. It's a large, large volume of data. And again, part of the reason is simply the sheer size of our study areas. There's also, our studies are presented by watershed. So if you look at the map here, it's also given on the wall here if you want to take a look at it later on during the day. We've broken it out by Bristol Bay watershed and Cook Inlet watersheds. So the Bristol Bay watershed encompasses those two, the tan and the yellow study areas. So what we mean there is that streams and all the waters that flow into Bristol Bay have their own set of studies, baseline studies. And then the pink area is what we call the Cook Inlet watershed. And those, all of those waters flow into Cook Inlet. So the baseline document is organized according to those two watersheds. Charlotte's talked about the objectives. Sun is going to, this is very brief, mentioned that it's to characterize and understand the existing environment. We use it for mine planning, and it's also a critical component for the development of the environmental impact statement. The nuts and bolts, I've already talked a lot about how it's organized, 53 chapters, and there's 26 chapters per watershed. And it's the same studies presented in both of these watersheds. Obviously the information is different, it's a different region, but there's 26 per section, and then the introduction is the 53rd chapter. The appendices are a lot of background information about planning for our studies. We have study plans, we have quality assurance project plans, things like that support all of the studies for the program. This has come up, and it's something that we decided to put in here just to indicate why we presented the data as a locked PDF. Some PDFs, if they're not locked, it's not that hard to get to the data and move it into a different kind of file where you can use the information with statistics and things like that. And we felt that it was important to not release it to the public in a format or a file that would be easily allowed to be moved into other types of software to avoid inadvertent corruption of the data and to protect the integrity of the data. It's important that the data be protected by all users. We have very strict systems internally that keep even our consultants from running the risk of having a large file of data that ends up corrupted. So we protect our databases. And so that was the purpose and the rationale for not distributing this to the public in a format that could be easily manipulated. The information or the studies themselves are broken out in three broad categories. We have the physical environment, the biological environment, and the human environment. And now we're getting into the technical studies themselves. So for the physical environment, we cover soils, geochemistry, surface water and groundwater hydrology, water quality, all those physical aspects of the environment that comprise a solid baseline study. The last one that you see down there called trace elements. For this project, what we mean by trace elements is the characterization of soil samples, sediment samples, fish tissues, vegetation tissues, including and also muscle tissues, marine tissues, the chemical composition of those. So we've collected a wide number of samples for all those different matrices, and the trace elements means that that's gone through a chemical analysis to measure the baseline composition of those components throughout the environment. Just so you know what that term means, because it's used often. There's a whole chapter on it in the document. Okay, biological environment. Here we're covering wildlife, threatened and endangered species, vegetation, wetlands, fish, and aquatics. So this is the whole range of those kinds of studies. And finally, the human environment. So here it's not so much the hard sciences, as they say, but more in the realm of social sciences. It does include subsistence, cultural resources. Those are the two that actually involve field studies where we go out and for cultural resources, actually get on the ground and look for archaeological artifacts and things like that. Subsistence involves interviews with communities. So there's data collection there in the field. The other studies are what we more like call desktop studies, where people are looking at references and research information that we know about the environment to develop baseline information about those topics. This here, I don't expect you to read this. This is a very, very small type and everything, and it's not intended to be read word for word. It's basically to get across the wide number of consulting firms, large and small, that we've used on this project for all the different disciplines. We've tried real hard to find experts in the different disciplines to conduct these studies, and we've made an effort to retain these experts throughout the life of the project. There's tremendous value in that. And so what we see here are a number of different companies for all the different disciplines. There's anywhere in any given year 20 to 30 different consulting firms working on this project, hundreds of scientists. Many of them are based here in Alaska. Some of them, the expertise really isn't quite what we need here, and we have used consultants outside of Alaska on occasion for some of our studies. A little bit more on that. So the list continues. The document itself, 27,000 pages. A lot of it is simply data tables and graphs and figures. It's not all text. So recognizing the depth and breadth of all this information and realizing the challenge of trying to make it usable and something that could be more easily ascertained by people, we've done two things. We've prepared a technical summary. It's a lot smaller, 426 pages. And in that summary, there's a separate summary for every single chapter in the document, and they range from anywhere from 2 to 10 or 15 pages each. So we've really condensed the information down to the salient points about what we did and what we found. So that's a good reference if the document itself is maybe too onerous for some people. The other thing that we did is we prepared a document entitled The Pebble Environment. And this is an overview of our studies, much, much shorter. It reads more like an article and is broken out by physical, biological, and social environments so that you can read about the information kind of from the bigger picture perspective. So hopefully this will, our intention here and hope is that people can get a flavor for the work and have these tools to go into whatever detail they might be interested in. Okay, here you don't have to read every word either, and I only have one slide after this. So this document is on the internet. The web address there is pebbleresearch.com. I encourage you to go there. The entire document is there. If you go down to, it's kind of hard to see, but down at the bottom, this is the home page. If you go to this website, you'll see this home page. And down there towards the bottom of the text, there's a link that takes you to the document itself. So when you click that link, what you see is this sheet here. This comes up. And now you have all the different sections of the environmental baseline document there that you can click on, open up a section, and get to every single chapter that is in the document itself. And I believe, I don't have them in these slides here, but I believe that on this same website there's links to the summary that I described, the technical summary, and also to the shorter version, that 56-page overview of our baseline studies. And that's all I have. I don't know if we have time for questions or not.